You've written about the conflict yourself. You've said it's one of the most worrying times in your life.
Yeah.
What did the Allies do about Russia? Because we've got Putin, who has threatened to use nuclear weapons, and he is a man who in the past has followed through with his threats. So what options are open to the Allies to do something more meaningful about this invasion?
That's right. I mean, and don't forget that when Vladimir Putin talks about such things, he has got form. I mean, the Litvinenko poisoning in London more than a decade ago, and the Salisbury poisonings, people have sort of forgotten about. But these were two occasions when President Putin's assassins went to Great Britain and killed Alexander Litvinenko on one occasion, and subsequently tried to kill another former KGB agent. And they did so not by trying to shoot them, stab them, or anything else, but by using a chemical weapon of such toxicity that had it got out wider, it would have killed tens of thousands of people in London. And why did he do that in those assassinations? It was because he wanted to send a message of strength. He wanted to say, look, this is what we could do if we wanted to. So, and I've never thought there's been enough attention paid to this, that he effectively sent agents with a WMD to Britain twice. And the world still didn't take him seriously enough. Now, the really deep complexity of the crisis in Ukraine is I think, that several things. One is there is a terrible historical precedent going on here, which is Ukraine in the 1990s, you remember, gave up the nuclear arsenal that was on its terrain. And it did so in an agreement where Britain, Russia, America assured Ukraine that they would defend its sovereignty effectively, that they assured it of security benefits from doing so. So we already see here, once again, a terrible lesson of the 21st century, which you could argue we saw in Libya 10 years ago with Colonel Gaddafi, which is if you give up your nuclear weapons, you can be invaded. If you have nuclear weapons, everyone has to step back. And this is just a terrible, at a time when we're trying to make sure that the Iranians and others don't go nuclear, this is the biggest invitation to say, once you're nuclear, you can do anything. When you're not nuclear, or if you give up your nukes like Ukraine did, like Libya did, you're incredibly vulnerable. So that's just one of the lessons. But there are many others. And I do think that the West, that NATO is in a very, very tricky position here. We understandably want to help friends and allies in Ukraine, but we need to make sure that we do so without going whatever it is that the line that Putin sees as being an intervention, effectively, by NATO or other Western forces. What that tripwire is, nobody is actually quite sure. Some people say, of course, it's a no-fly zone, and I think that's true, because a no-fly zone would see eventually British or other jets have to shoot down Russian jets. But, is the ongoing provision of surface-to-air missiles, for instance, eventually a step too far? President Putin has said even the economic sanctions are effectively a foreign interference. So this is an incredibly dangerous and delicate moment.
Yes, Putin cornered is a dangerous, dangerous man. I'm with you. This is one of the scariest periods in our lifetime. Now, back to President Biden. We know he appointed Kamala Veep, not because of her credentials or because she was the best candidate, but because he wanted a woman of colour. Well, having learnt nothing from that experience, he now is determined to appoint, again, not necessarily the best candidate, but a woman of colour to the Supreme Court. He has nominated Ketanji Brown Jackson, but his choice, Douglas, is already being criticised, not by the media. The media's loving her, but she's been criticised for her limited experience on the bench. She was only appointed to the US Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit last year, nominated by Joe Biden, and Obama nominated her in 2013 as a federal district judge. So, Douglas, the president seems determined to make history here by appointing a black woman, no matter if there are better candidates. What sort of a message does that send?
It just embeds further this horrible, divisive thing of our time, where people are judged not on their merits, but by the color of their skin or their chromosomes. And, it's what we've all tried to avoid, but we've had a half-century unwinding of the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King. The Biden administration, modern-day America, you might say, and all the spillage that comes from it culturally and politically, all of that points to this reversal of Dr. King's message. People are to be judged by their skin color, by their chromosomes, by their sexual orientation, not by their competency. It's perfectly understandable to say, we want to make sure that the Supreme Court is representative of the United States. Well, sure, but there are other ways to do that, not least of just selecting people, as has happened in the past, according to merit. Now, the Democrats, of course, were furious when the Republicans actually nominated successfully Judge Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. And my word, they did not give Clarence Thomas any leeway for being black. In fact, they tried everything to keep Clarence Thomas out. So this sort of Democrat thing of actually we're on the sides of minorities is not in any case borne out by their own prior experience. But yes, I wrote this week about Judge Jackson because I think that there is a chance that she is simply going to glide through the nomination processes because the Democrats want her because of the reasons that Biden wants her. And the Republicans don't want to fall into the trap they see, and so as a result, her actual record will not be looked at. And I wrote in the New York Post this week about an example of her actual record, which I hope does come up at the hearings, which is a terrible precedent she set in a judgment a decade ago, 8 years ago now, in the case of an American citizen who was killed on the Malaysian Airlines disaster. And she basically denied the family the right to take action against Boeing and Malaysia Airlines. It was a terrible precedent, extraordinarily unfeeling towards the family in question. I just hope, in putting stories like this out there, that that at least she is questioned at her nomination. Otherwise, I think it'll just be a glide through for characteristics reasons.
Oh, and no one can criticise her because anyone who questions her experience or credentials is labelled a racist. And you've probably copped it for pointing out that Malaysian Airlines ruling. Interestingly, back in 2005, we could have had a black judge on the Supreme Court, but guess who threatened to filibuster and stop her nomination and confirmation? Joe Biden, because she was nominated by George W. Bush and they did not want her to succeed. So the hypocrisy here.
I'm so pleased you raised that because that has not had nearly enough attention, Rita. Absolutely. People need to zoom in on this. This could have happened 17 years ago. And Joe Biden personally made sure it didn't happen. So when I hear that, like you, when I hear them saying, now it's so important we get a black woman on the court, you had that chance, but you made sure it didn't happen purely for partisan reasons. So maybe partisan reasons do trump even identity politics for the Democrats.
Oh, always a pleasure, Douglas. I'll speak to you next Monday.
It's a great pleasure, Rita.